You've got the Big Ten that are grabbing a bunch of teams. Somebody's got to save Oregon State. There's nothing better than betting on late-night games in Corvallis on a Saturday night while you're waiting for Hawaii to kick
Pullman,
off.
too. Our good friends up in there in Pullman, Washington. Washington State, Oregon State, both really unique, awesome places. And you feel for those student athletes, because that's the unfortunate part that's gotten taken out of their hands is there's only 4 teams left in the Pac-12 right now. And if you're a coach, a player who's a part of any of those athletic programs, you're concerned because you went there thinking you're going to be part of a Power 5 conference, or at least a part of the Pac-12, which is a more legitimate conference. And now I'm not sure if they try to take teams from the Mountain West, if they get absorbed by the Mountain. I mean, at this point, the Mountain West has more power than the Pac-12 does.
Yeah.
And so, they run the risk of losing the rest of the teams that are in the conference, maybe to the Pac-12, maybe not, or somewhere else. But either way, it's not a good position to be in if you're one of those 4 schools.
Just to see what's happened to the Pac-12, and this isn't an indictment on everybody because there's a lot of people who are passionate about playing for their school or passionate about their alma mater who really care, and let's just call it, we'll just keep it at football. Football means a lot to them. But there is a reality, and people out here on the West Coast can get pissed about this all they want. They can get upset about this, but this is a fact. And we've talked about it. It just matters more in other parts of the country. Yeah. And this is a microcosm of what has been an issue to where the interest level, look, you do Big Noon Kickoff. You go to stadiums that are packing 100,000 people there.
Right.
You go to certain places in the Pac-12, and it's like, that's cool. Like, yeah, maybe we're fired up about it, maybe we're not. And as somebody who was born and raised in Southern California, I didn't really get it until I went and saw college football elsewhere. And then you go to the SEC and you go to some of these other places and you realize it's on another level. And it's why when COVID hit, look, you had Justin Fields was out marching and protesting, trying to get a season back. You had Greg Sankey in the SEC trying to come up with solutions and coming up with plans. The ACC had a plan. Notre Dame had a plan. Like, everybody had a plan, and the Pac-12 was like, hold on. Everybody wait, hold on here. And you've got players in and around the Pac-12 that are looking around going, we'd like to play. Can we get an opportunity? And just from the top all the way to the bottom, it just felt like the beginning of the end. And here we are. They got 4 teams left as the season's approaching. So after this upcoming year, who the hell knows what's going to happen to the conference?
That approach you're mentioning, that let's wait. We don't want to be a first mover in that, right? That not only displayed itself during COVID, it displayed itself with the media rights deal before that. We talked about, Larry Scott back in, 2017? And even, this year with George Kliavkoff, and the way he had handled those negotiations, letting the Big 12 get to a media rights deal before him, which then limits the amount of windows you can even be in. And really your leverage, too, if those networks already have another conference. But that strategy – and not prioritizing football, which is ultimately what you're tapping into, was ultimately the demise of the Pac-12. And people who are Pac-12 enthusiasts can challenge me on this, but what you said is true. And I think whether it's Kirk Herbstreit and Game Day or me and anyone else on our crew at Big Noon Kickoff,
what up, Big Noon Kickoff?
You do get a different feel when you go across the country and see these different places where football is a way of life. And football has been very fruitful to many of the universities who've embraced it. And instead of, trying to promote yourself as the Conference of Champions and how many Directors' Cup trophies you've won, which have traditionally been something like the Pac-12 and Stanford in particular have been really competitive in, you've missed the boat on the economics of how this is all going to work. And I think a lot of people who are frustrated with what's happening in college sports are saying, well, this is unfair to the student athletes, and this is all about a money grab. Well, okay, but you could make that argument with anything in America. It's a free market. Anytime a company grows, scales, sells out, right, well, it was a money grab, right? Was it really about what they were doing, what product they were producing, what service they were providing, or was it about money? It's always about money. And the problem with the Pac-12 is they didn't want to prioritize one specific sport like the SEC, like the Big Ten, and some of the others have done because they understood the revenue model. And so what becomes difficult now And what a lot of people who are upset about me or anyone else saying it's okay, it was a money grab, is understanding what's coming down the pipeline. There's a world that exists where football, men's and women's basketball, which are the revenue-driving sports, aren't a part of these schools.
Yeah.
Hypothetically speaking, you could make the case that they could be looked at as a minor league or professional sport where they're licensing back the rights to use the logo and the mascot, the trademark, all these things back to the school. And so then the question becomes, well, if they're no longer considered student athletes and they're in this professional world, which there's a lot of moving parts to get to that point, what happens to the rest of sports? What happens to the rest of the Olympic sports? And who's going to pay for them? If you don't have that revenue coming in from the revenue-driving sports in football and men's and women's basketball, you're running at a deficit. And you're now putting more pressure on the school to figure out how they're going to fund those. And so they either have to drop those programs and they become club sports, which are privately funded through donors, or the university has to come up with other ways of being able to, and maybe from the licensing and trademark fees, et cetera, that they take from that would fund those sports. But they may have to drop some sports. And then you have to factor in Title IX into all of this and how you go about supplying equal scholarships because, for at least for women's sports, you have 85 less scholarships now that are no longer there that you have to match on the women's sports side with football not being there. So there's so many different moving parts and questions that come up. But it's crazy to me when I hear people talk about how, this is the greed and money. Okay, I understand that, but do you want these sports to survive?
Exactly.
Because if they're going to survive, these universities had to find a way of being able to not only remain competitive, but provide the student athletes with what they need in order to be able to their scholarship, their travel, the expenses, everything else. And so this is the decision they were kind of forced into because of the lack of leadership of university presidents, in particular in the Pac-12, of Larry Scott. So that's what's got us here. But people who are sitting there like, condemning the fact it's a money grab. Okay, show me somewhere where it's not.
Right.
Like show me some industry in the United States where it's not a money grab.
That's a money grab. How could they? By the way, can you give me a $2 quick pick on the 1.5 mega millions that's going on? Everything is a money grab. That's the whole point. But my favorite part about just the Pac-12 network and all that. So last year, remember when USC played Oregon State early in the season? It was a really
great
good game. Great game.
Oregon State almost pulled that thing off for a ridiculous throw by Caleb Williams.
So I just remember the hoops that I had to jump through just to be able to watch that game. And I live in California, and I couldn't find the game. And I had to, you got to go to this and go to. And I'm thinking to myself, you've got two undefeated teams. One of them is 7th in the country. And you've got to go through all of this just to be able to watch. That wouldn't happen in the Big Ten. That wouldn't happen in the SEC. It was so small time, nickel and dime, and it was a phenomenal game between USC and Oregon State in Corvallis that went down to the wire. None of that stuff happens in these other places. Like if Alabama's 7th in the country and they're playing another undefeated team from the conference, I know where I'm going to be able to watch it. I know when it's going to be on. Same with the Big Ten, but it just felt like that was the Pac-12 and that was a microcosm for the Pac-12 and what was soon to be the end of the Pac-12. Which is now, are we calling it the Pac-4, by the way? Is that what we're going to call it?
Four Pac probably sounds a little better.
What are we doing? So,
I think at this point we need to put those 4 teams ahead of the Pac or whatever comes after that.
The 4-pack.
I'm just saying, maybe the 4-pack probably sounds better at this point. I don't mean to make light of it or joke about it. As I said before, I do feel for all the student athletes and the coaches. But as we also portrayed in the first hour, when I was at least comparing the Big 12 and what those teams that have now moved to the Big 12 and what their travel schedule looks like, it's not as drastically different as you would have thought. Now, again, for Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA, those schools are going to be much more impacted by their travel heading to the Big 10. It's a different conversation. But the difference with that is those schools are also getting compensated more. Now, maybe not Oregon and Washington because of when they got in. Eventually they will, though, once they get to the new TV media rights deal. But at this juncture, Oregon and Washington made a decision where they feel like that was in their best interest moving forward in order to supply the necessary funding to the student athletes and keep their programs intact. And it's hard to have an issue with that because of such bad leadership that you saw from the Pac-12. And so, again, some people are going to express concern for these student athletes, and I think that there is a concern for baseball and softball and volleyball and all these other sports and how it's going to work out. I trust the people who are involved in this, that being able to put together a plan that won't be quite as burdensome. And I also would say to a lot of people out there that our recollection, the people who are my age, older people who are largely speaking out against this that have issues with it, they've apparently missed on what's happened in academia. There's a lot of stuff online now, man. All these schools have adjusted, especially in undergrad, to being online. And so that they can make a lot of the adjustments they need to with online curriculum and courses in order to satisfy the degree requirements. And so it's not as big of a concern as I think it would have been had we not gone through COVID and had all these changes to what curriculum looks like.